There was a man who didn't fit in anywhere, but he was the priceless spirit of heavy metal, a world where cigarette smoke, hard whiskey, and guitars screaming in wild fury permeated everything. He kept to himself. Never went wild or chased after the dazzling lights on stage. Cliff Burton was the guy with the untamed, unruly hair, the flared pants of the 1970s, a philosophy book clutched in one hand, and the bass guitar that looked like it was a part of him. At the tender age of 24, he disappeared like a meteor, leaving Metallica fans with an unfillable gap in their hearts. But how did this loner, nature lover, and social outcast become a legendary figure in rock and roll? What was the inspiration for his ferocious yet lyrical bass sound, music with the potential to temporarily halt the expansion of the universe? Not everyone saw Cliff Burton. A seismic shock he was. Every note, every tear, and the souls of those who once believed rock was more than just sound carry the beauty, tragedy, and sacredness of his story. Here was a spirit. Childhood and teenage years. Castro Valley, California is a little hamlet where Clifford Lee Burton was born on February 10, 1962. As a child, the only sound he heard was the piano in his living room. Cliff grew up in a middle-class home that valued literature and the arts. He preferred to spend his childhood outside, listening to classical symphonies, poring over old poetry books, and letting his imagination run wild. Scott and Connie were his older siblings. He was the youngest of the three. Prior to the initial disaster, everything appeared to be going swimmingly. Scott was only 16 years old when he passed away from a brain aneurysm. Cliff was just 13 years old at the time, and the pain of that loss really affected his delicate spirit. Screams and defiance were non-existent. He was just a shy young man, playing bass like he was yelling his brother's name. He vowed to himself from that point on, "In memory of my brother, I intend to excel as a bassist." This was real. A solemn promise. Cliff would rather have stayed in his room and practiced until his fingertips bled than join in on extracurricular activities or chase after pals. He was fully immersed in the bass, not merely a student. For him, music was an escape to a realm where the unfathomable could reverberate through the strings and anguish could be turned into rhythm. Classical literature and philosophy were two of Cliff's other great loves in life, beside music. He was able to read works by Hughes, P.K. Lowell while listening to Bach, and then seamlessly transition to Black Sabbath, without experiencing any inconsistency. In his view, light and shadow had always been side by side in the universe. Maybe that's why Cliff was able to blend the tumultuous intensity of his bass lines with elements of poetry, sadness, and classical elegance. He was one of the few metal musicians capable of doing so. His professors said he was strange, but very bright. His pals made fun of him, calling him an old soul because he seemed to be the kind of child who could never be reached no matter how far he smiled or how many books he had on hand. Cliff, nevertheless, had one thing that no amount of money or fame could ever replace: his brother's secret vow and his passion for music. Within a boy's heart blazed a gentle, unfaltering fire that would consume the entire universe. Starting out in one's profession. When Cliff was a teenager, he went against the grain of his contemporaries, who were more interested in following the latest fads in popular music or rebelling against adult authority. Where a lifetime's worth of experiences could be revealed via the rich, powerful bass notes. Cliff didn't pick up bass because he wanted to be a performer, it became his outlet for expression. After that, whatever band he was a part of had an otherworldly energy, not overpowering or exploding, but eerie and enduring, like an unending nightmare. Cliff got his start playing in bands around the Bay Area, including EZ Street. It was there that he played guitar with Jim Martin, who would go on to form Faith No More. It wasn't until Cliff became a member of the up-and-coming metal band Trauma that his talent as a bassist began to be recognized. Cliff, even from his perch at the very back of the stage, captivated the audience with his long hair, denim jacket, and bass tone that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Until Cliff's bass rumbled through the auditorium in 1982, Metallica's Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield sat exhausted and disillusioned in the audience during a Trauma performance in Los Angeles. They had never heard anything like it. A wah-wah pedal bass solo that shook the audience awake, distorted like a guitar, yet rhythmically grounded and deeply meaningful. Not only did Cliff play the bass, but he transformed it into a soul scream. Cliff wasn't in a rush, but James and Lars felt they had to bring him into Metallica relatively soon. He had settled into a comfortable life in San Francisco, where he was well connected socially and musically. Considering that Cliff had previously characterized Los Angeles as fake and soulless, he made an unfathomable demand of Metallica while they were headquartered there. That was unexpected by everyone in Metallica. At last, though, they reached a consensus, and that choice altered the course of the band's history. At the tail end of 1982, Cliff formally joined Metallica, and the band transformed from a youthful ensemble constructing Anglo-American heavy metal riffs into something much bigger. They were already unique among bands of their time, but with Cliff they added a new dimension, an introspective, philosophical, artistic one. Cliff didn't say much, but his arrangements and songwriting suggestions always got the band to re-evaluate their sound. In that chaotic environment, Cliff Burton's unassuming demeanor, the way he held his bass like a hushed prayer, was what drew audiences in. A promising career. Everything changed when Cliff Burton joined Metallica. Not by making ostentatious claims or showing off his skills, but by simply being there. He appeared out of nowhere, bringing with him a wealth of classical knowledge, the spirit of a poet, and a bass guitar that seemed to be an extension of his own heart. The rest of the band continued to charge forward with the raw, rebellious fury of thrash and punk. Metallica made their dramatic debut with 1983's Kill 'Em All, but for Cliff, it was the first time he truly showcased the bass. Not only was Anaesthesia a solo act, but so did Extracting Teeth. A personal manifesto, it served as an introduction. Here I am, and this is my storytelling style. Using wah-wah pedals, distortion, tapping, and wild yet soft screams and whispers, Cliff elevated the bass to the position of lead instrument, while other bands relegated it to the role of support. Nobody else in metal had the guts to accomplish what they did, and that one song changed everyone's perspective on bass. Cliff, though, contributed more than just technique. Beginning with 1984's Ride the Lightning, he started molding Metallica's sound with a profoundly philosophical outlook. Songs like Creeping Death and Fade to Black, by which the bell tolls, carried more than simply metal, carrying soul, because Cliff not only played, but also thought, proposed harmonies, structures, and emotional arcs. In particular, for many who listened to Whole Lotta Love, where the bass intro, often confused for guitar, sounded like a death knell and drew them into a desolate, endless wasteland. This was more than just original thought, it was the natural outcome of a lifelong pursuit of music as a means of transcendence. Cliff found his literary inspiration in the works of Hemingway. Unlike any other metal band of the period, they incorporated themes of life, death, and war into their gloomy and foreboding soundscapes. Cliff improved Metallica's sound in more ways than one. He added depth, layers, agony, and soulfulness by making it so. Like a hidden stream percolating through the earth and altering the surface topography, the change was subtle but profound. After that, Cliff's final full-length album, 1980's CXS Master of Puppets, was the pinnacle of his artistic career. Not only was it Metallica's magnum opus, but it also ranks among metal's all-time great albums. In the instrumental Orion, which lacked lyrics yet conveyed more than words could, Cliff's heart pounded with intensity and wrath. Starting with a rumbling introduction reminiscent of stars colliding and continuing through a painful middle section where Cliff's bass guided like a wandering spirit seeking its way home, Orion seemed to be his musical will, as if he knew this was his final opportunity to express everything that remained unsaid. "Listen to Orion," James Hetfield once said, "and you will know who Cliff was." Each bass line, pause, and rumble carries the weight of anguish, isolation, pride, and the need to escape. From a creative soul that never really belonged here, but whose influence is profoundly felt. Despite Metallica's growing popularity, Cliff's reserved demeanor remained unaltered while the band opened for Ozzy Osbourne and received positive reviews from fans all around Europe. He was unconcerned with fame and wealth. He read books backstage. He would write his lover letters by hand while on tour buses. On his days off, he would go on solitary walks to take in the scenery. He seemed to have only seen fame as a necessary evil for expressing himself musically. Because of that, Cliff Burton became an iconic figure to a whole generation of music fans, not only Metallica. As a leader, he took metal from its surface-level defiance and guided it into philosophical depths and the spiritual experience of music. In the midst of everyone else's cries for attention, Cliff played his music and the world finally paid attention. Although he only participated on 3 albums, Cliff Burton revolutionized rock bass with just 3. Because he was a musical genius who could transform moments of quiet into haunting beauty, the metal community mourned his departure as much as it did the departure of a band member. The public's perception of rock musicians was drastically at odds with Cliff Burton's private life, even though he was a part of a metal band that was notoriously defiant and full of energy during that era. He stayed far away from the glitz and glamour of the music business, lived a modest life, and avoided being showy. During Metallica's peak, Cliff was in a committed relationship with his girlfriend Corinne Lynn. His loved ones attested to the fact that their relationship was solid and tranquil. Cliff was the type of lover who would always demonstrate subtle, considerate care rather than ostentatious demonstrations of love. Even though Corinne kept a low profile after his death, everyone knows that she was heartbroken and never got over it. Because of the significance she had in Cliff's life, his relatives maintained contact with her. He has a reputation for being practical and forthright while interacting with Metallica bandmates and friends. One time, James Hetfield said that he was the band's moral compass because he spoke out when something was wrong. Despite his lack of aggression, Cliff had firm limits on his own behavior. He shied away from the toxic partying and superficiality that afflicted many rock performers of his time and despised partying even more. During his free time, he would read instead of going to backstage parties. Those close to him knew of his profound admiration for J.R.R. Tolkien's writings as well as other works of ancient literature and philosophy. He was quite dedicated to himself, and it showed in his unique style. Cliff refused to change from his signature look: flannel shirts, long, unruly hair, and worn-out Converse sneakers, even as the rest of the band started to tailor their appearance to the tastes of the crowd. It didn't bother him if he stood out, he never tried to blend in. Those who knew Cliff well respected him, even if he didn't have many close friends. Cliff was slow to warm up, but once he did, his honesty and genuineness shone through. Until the end, he remained true to what was most important to him: music and his own integrity, according to everyone who worked with him. Metallica were performing at the height of their career on the European leg of their Damage Incorporated tour in support of Master of Puppets when the tragic accident occurred on September 27, 1986. Following their Stockholm, Sweden, performance, the band embarked on an overnight bus journey to Copenhagen, Denmark. The weather was terrible, very cold, very foggy, and very slick roads. Approximately at 6 in the morning, disaster befell. A lonely field next to Ljungby is where the tour bus went downhill and overturned. Upon waking up from the crash, the most of the band members had sustained relatively minor injuries. However, Cliff Burton could not be located on board the bus. He was pinned beneath the bus after being flung out of a window, which they discovered in a horrifying moment. James Hetfield and other members hurriedly surveyed the situation, attempting to ascertain the nature of the incident while simultaneously requesting assistance. Nothing came of it. Cliff, who was only 24 years old, passed away instantly. Tragically, Cliff's placement in that bunk was only determined by a simple draw the previous night. Metallica members would use a drawing card system to assign sleeping quarters each night. Cliff was supposed to play that position that night, but he exchanged places with Kirk Hammett after drawing the winning card. Such a catastrophic result may have been avoided had anyone anticipated the little choice that had been made. Swedish authorities initially rejected the bus driver's account that the vehicle had skidded on black ice. No one was ever charged, yet suspicions started circulating later that the driver might have lost consciousness or fallen asleep behind the wheel. Because of the indescribable sorrow at the premature death of someone regarded as Metallica's musical essence, the precise reason was less important to the band and their supporters than the loss itself. The band wasn't the only ones rocked by Cliff's death, the entire metal scene felt its impact. Many were shocked that Cliff, who looked unaffected by the usual problems that rock stars face, should have died in such a mundane way. He was known for his level head and moderate lifestyle. Cut abruptly at the peak of her promising career, this artist's path had an unfair, terrible, and brutally sudden quality to it. Following Cliff's passing, Metallica intensely contemplated disbanding. They continued, not to replace him but to respect him, after weeks of destruction. From that point on, Metallica's musical thinking, seriousness in composition, lifestyle, and handling of success all bore some resemblance to Cliff's, according to Lars Ulrich, James Hetfield, and the rest of the band. On October 7, 1986, a funeral was held in California for Cliff. He was cremated, and a secret spot close to his house was where his remains were scattered. A mournful, wordless farewell was played at the service by playing Orion, the instrumental he helped mold so intimately. Cliff Burton's influence and legacy extend well beyond the 3 albums on which he participated with Metallica. While metal bands of his time were known for their fury and speed, Cliff provided a new perspective, mastered technique, classical musical thought, and most importantly, the capacity to express profound emotion through bass, which was sometimes neglected in the genre. The majority of metal bassists prior to Cliff mostly provided rhythmic support, acting as a sturdy bass but never taking center stage. Cliff stood in stark contrast. He gave the bass the ability to express one's unique individuality, unleash one's limitless inventiveness, and even lead emotionally. Anaesthesia, Removing Teeth, Orion, and For Whom the Bell Tolls are just a few of the tracks that demonstrate more than just his technical prowess. They established that bass could hold its own as an instrumental leader inside a song's framework. Cliff had an impact that went beyond only music. It changed the way metal musicians of the future saw their own duties. Cliff was an inspiration to many famous bassists, including Robert Trujillo, who would later replace Cliff in Metallica, David Ellefson, Megadeth, and Steve DiGiorgio, Death Testament, and not only because of his playing but also because of the freedom, honesty, and creativity he represented. Cliff was an inspiration to Metallica long after he passed away. The song To Live Is to Die was included on the 1988 album Injustice for All as a tribute to him. An excerpt from a poem that Cliff wrote and which is referenced in the CD booklet serves as the basis for the spoken word portion of the song. Despite the criticism around the album's notoriously low bass mix, many feel it unwittingly represented the whole Cliff left behind, a presence that is impossible to replace. Cliff became an icon of the uncompromising artist, and not just because of his music. Despite the abundance of temptation in his field, he opted to live a simple life, remain loyal to his principles, and resist the need to conform to others' expectations of him. Cliff Burton is cherished not only as a legendary rock performer, but also as an authentic artist and a symbol of something more. Cliff joined the other founding members of Metallica in receiving an induction ceremony for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009. Ray and Jan Burton, his parents, collected the medal in his honor. Ray made the touching statement that Cliff loved music in his brief but moving address. This was not a job. For him, it was vital. And I believe he's still playing somewhere. Those words serve as a lasting truth. Cliff Burton's legacy doesn't lie in what he owned or achieved during his lifetime, but in the way his music continues to resonate, reshaping a genre, inspiring thousands of young musicians, and being remembered not because he tried to be great, but because he simply was. Cliff Burton, never truly gone. Cliff Burton passed away at just 24 years old, but what he left behind didn't end with his funeral. In the years that followed, and still today, his name lives on not just in the memory of Metallica fans, but as a cultural icon within the metal community. He stands as proof that staying true to music and to oneself can outlive a person's lifetime. No one kept that flame alive more faithfully and warmly than Cliff's father, Ray Burton. For many years after Cliff's death, Ray continued to attend music events, fan gatherings, memorials, always ready to speak with anyone who loved his son. Even in old age, he traveled on his own, shook hands with fans, and spoke about Cliff with a calm voice, tinged with pride but never boasting. To fans, Ray wasn't just the father of a legend. He was the guardian of Cliff's spirit, preserving his character in the most genuine and humble way. In 2018, Alameda County, California, where Cliff was born, officially declared February 10 his birthday as Cliff Burton Day. It wasn't marked by fireworks or grand stages, but by fans around the world sharing old songs, memories, photos, and above all, gratitude for an artist who lived and created on his own terms without compromise. That same year, Cliff's family partnered with Castro Valley High School to establish the Cliff Burton Music Scholarship, supporting students passionate about the arts who faced financial hardship. The scholarship didn't require outstanding grades or exceptional talent, just true passion. And that, above all, was what Cliff himself lived for. Beyond official tributes, Cliff Burton's fan community continues to grow worldwide. Tribute videos, Orion covers, and hundreds of heartfelt comments are shared every year on his birthday and the day of his passing. On music forums, is still remembered as an artist who was never truly replaced. Even though Metallica went on to achieve enormous success with other members, Metallica too has never let his name be forgotten. At major performances, Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield often speak of Cliff, pay tribute, and sometimes even perform Orion as a spiritual rite. There's no stone monument built in his honor, but the music he left behind is his immortal gravestone, stronger than any statue. Cliff's death was not just a personal loss for Metallica. It was a symbolic loss for an entire generation of artists. Artists who believed it was possible to live authentically, create without compromise, and leave a mark without ever walking the beaten path. Cliff Burton never tried to become a legend. He didn't seek the spotlight, didn't change himself to please the crowd, and never lived for applause. Yet it was that very simplicity, that unwavering conviction of a man brave enough to live true to his soul, that made him immortal. In a world of music that thrives on noise, Cliff chose calm. In an industry obsessed with glamour, he chose depth. And in a band on the fast track to massive success, Cliff preserved a quiet space for himself, where art could exist in its purest form. He was with Metallica for only 3 years, 3 albums, a brief chapter. But that presence was enough to alter the course of an entire genre, enough for his low, resonant notes to keep echoing, not just in music, but in how future generations understand what truly matters. Authenticity, pride, and an identity that cannot be replaced. Cliff Burton didn't die at 24. He simply stopped there. The rest of him, his melodies, his principles, and that quiet yet enduring inspiration, still lives on in the hearts of millions of music lovers. What are your thoughts on Cliff Burton? A quiet artist whose influences felt so powerfully, what part of his short but profound life moves you, makes you reflect, or resonates with you most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe this story deserves to be heard by more people, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join us in honoring those who lived and burned brightly, if only for a moment, but left behind a light that never fades.